He lived in a quiet neighborhood where life moved slowly, and most people kept to themselves. His house was modest but well kept, with a small garden out front and a porch that caught the morning sun. He liked it that way, peaceful, simple, predictable. Every morning he would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the world wake up around him. Birds chirped in the trees, neighbors walked their dogs, and the occasional car passed by, leaving a trail of dust behind. He enjoyed these small moments, the ones that most people overlooked, because to him, they were everything. No one really knew much about him. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't talk about his past, and he didn't boast about his achievements. People saw him as friendly, helpful, and quiet. He would wave at neighbors, smile at children playing outside, and sometimes lend a hand to anyone who needed it. He mowed lawns, helped fix fences, or carried groceries for the elderly. In the neighborhood, he was respected but also somewhat mysterious. People felt comfortable around him, but at the same time, no one really knew what went on behind his calm eyes. His daily life followed a routine, and he liked it that way. Each morning after coffee, he would take a slow walk around the neighborhood. He enjoyed observing the little things, how the sunlight hit the leaves, the smell of fresh grass, the sound of children laughing. He believed in appreciating life's small details, the things many people rushed past. After his walk, he would return home, check on his garden, and spend the rest of the day reading or listening to music. He was content, and that contentment had a quiet strength behind it. But beneath this calm exterior, there was a depth that no one in the neighborhood could have imagined. He carried a past few could even dream of. For years, he had trained and served in one of the most dangerous branches of the military. His life had been defined by discipline, extreme challenges, and situations where a single mistake could mean death. Yet he never let that past define him in the eyes of the world. To the neighbors, he was just another man living quietly. The truth was that he had faced danger that most people couldn't even picture, and he had survived. Not just survived, he had thrived, mastering skills that allowed him to stay calm in any situation. But he had no need to prove it to anyone. That part of his life remained a secret, locked away like a book on a high shelf that no one could reach. The neighborhood, though quiet, had its own tensions. Some people were kind and open-minded, while others carried prejudices they never questioned. He had encountered these subtle judgments before, an uneasy glance here, a whispered comment there, but he never let them bother him. Confrontation had never been his way. He believed in living above it, in showing through actions rather than words that character mattered more than color or background. Still, there was a sense of unease in certain parts of the neighborhood, a tension that sometimes hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. On one particularly warm morning, as he sipped his coffee, he noticed a group of men across the street. They weren't neighbors he recognized. Their posture, the way they looked around, carried an air of arrogance, a feeling that they owned the streets they walked. He observed quietly, taking note of their actions without moving. They laughed among themselves, but their laughter had an edge, sharp and unpleasant. He could feel the tension building in the air, even if no one else seemed to notice. There was nothing he could do yet, no reason to act, but he stayed alert. Alertness had saved his life countless times before, and he wasn't about to ignore it now. Days passed, and the visits became more frequent. At first it was subtle, a shouted word, a glance that lingered too long, a gesture meant to intimidate. Then things began to escalate. His mailbox was knocked over, his car was scratched, and graffiti appeared on the wall of his garage. The words were hateful, meant to make him feel unsafe in his own home. Still, he didn't panic. He cleaned the graffiti, fixed the mailbox, and went about his day as usual. To the gang, these were small victories. To him, they were minor inconveniences. He had faced much worse in the past, and this was nothing he couldn't handle. Neighbors began to notice the damage and murmured among themselves. Some were curious, some afraid, and others judgmental. A few offered help, but he politely declined. He wanted to handle this himself, quietly and efficiently. He didn't need anyone's pity, and he certainly didn't want to cause a scene. He believed that strength was shown not in anger or loud words, but in calm, measured action. This was his philosophy, shaped by years of discipline and the challenges he had faced long before he came to this quiet neighborhood. Despite the growing tension, he continued his routines. Every morning, coffee on the porch, a walk through the streets tending to his garden. Every evening, a quiet meal, music in the background, and reflection on the day. He found peace in routine, and that peace gave him a sense of power. The gang believed they were instilling fear, but in reality they were simply testing someone who had already survived challenges they couldn't even imagine. He knew the value of patience, of waiting for the right moment, and he had waited. At night, when the neighborhood was quiet, he would sit on his porch and think. He remembered past missions, the friends he had lost, the obstacles he had overcome. Those memories weren't painful. They were reminders of his resilience. They reminded him that life was about more than appearances, more than what people assumed about you. Life was about preparedness, awareness, and the choices you made when faced with adversity. He understood danger in a way few could, and he understood restraint even more. Children played nearby, oblivious to the tension brewing just streets away. Neighbors greeted him warmly, some curious about the quiet strength they sensed but couldn't name. He never sought recognition. He didn't need it. His sense of self was rooted in knowledge, skill, and experience, not in the opinions of others. Still, he watched the neighborhood carefully, aware that the world was never as simple as it appeared. Safety was a balance of caution and confidence, and he had learned that balance the hard way. One afternoon, he noticed one of the gang members lingering near his garden. The man's eyes darted around, calculating, assessing. He pretended not to notice, but inside he cataloged every detail: the man's build, his movements, his possible weaknesses. This was not fear. It was preparation. He knew the value of knowing your opponent before a confrontation, and he had been trained to see things others overlooked. The gang thought they were bold, fearless, and intimidating. In reality, they were walking into a situation they could not comprehend, and he was fully aware of it. Yet, despite his past and his capabilities, he remained calm. There was no shouting, no threats, no displays of force. He simply continued with his life, gathering information quietly, ensuring he could respond if needed. He understood that control was more powerful than aggression. He understood that patience could turn the tables in ways anger never could. And so he waited quietly, confidently, knowing that one day, the situation would demand action and he would be ready. As the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, he sipped his coffee and watched the neighborhood settle into evening. The children's laughter faded, doors closed, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. He felt a strange sense of calm, even with the danger looming nearby. To the world, he appeared ordinary. To the gang, he was a target. But in truth, he was far from ordinary. He was a man who had survived unimaginable challenges, who had mastered the art of awareness, patience, and strength. And though no one knew it yet, the quiet life he led was about to intersect with chaos in a way that would reveal the depth of his power, his skill, and his unwavering resolve. For now, he watched, he waited, and he lived. The world saw a quiet neighbor, a kind and gentle man. But beneath the surface, a storm of discipline, strength, and experience lay in wait, ready to protect what he valued most: his home, his peace, and the life he had built with care. And so the first chapter of his story continued, calm and unassuming, yet charged with the promise of events that would change everything around him. Days passed, and the quiet tension in the neighborhood began to grow heavier. What had started as minor acts, graffiti on the garage, a mailbox knocked over, now escalated. The gang had become bolder, more brazen. It was no longer just words or small damage. One evening he returned home from his walk to find his front gate torn off its hinges. The familiar sound of splintering wood and twisted metal made him pause, but he did not panic. His past had prepared him for far worse, and his calm gaze scanned the damage. He silently noted every detail: the way the metal bent, the direction of the force, even footprints in the soil nearby. The neighborhood had started noticing too. Some neighbors whispered behind fences, fearful of crossing the group of men. Others shook their heads at the obvious vandalism. But he didn't need their concern. He had never sought validation from anyone. He preferred to assess situations himself, relying on his own judgment and awareness. He had learned long ago that fear and rumors could cloud judgment. Clear eyes, steady mind, and careful observation were far more reliable. That night the wind blew cold, carrying an uneasy chill. He sat on his porch as usual, coffee in hand, yet his thoughts were not about the weather or the quiet neighborhood. They were about preparation. Every sound, every movement, every shadow could matter. From a distance he could see the faint silhouettes of the men who had caused the damage earlier, They lingered too close, laughing among themselves, thinking the quiet man on the porch was unaware. They had no idea he had been observing them all along. The next morning brought more surprises. A car with tinted windows slowly circled the block. They were testing him, trying to provoke a reaction. He took no notice, maintaining his usual routine. He tended his garden, watered the plants, and began small repairs on the gate as if nothing had happened. But his mind was calculating. He was cataloging each detail: how long the car stayed, the number of men inside, the direction they approached from, even the way they looked at his property. Every tiny observation would help him respond should it come to that. Then the incidents became more direct. One afternoon, while he was trimming a bush near the side of the house, rocks were thrown at his windows. Shattered glass sparkled across the floor like small stars, but he remained calm. He did not run, did not yell, did not show fear. Instead, he carefully stepped back, assessed the damage, and took note of the trajectory. The gang assumed they were intimidating him. But what they didn't understand was that intimidation had little effect on someone who had walked through the deadliest situations in the world. The next attack was more destructive. Paint splashed across the walls, symbols drawn in threatening ways. Trash was dumped on the lawn, and strange notes with hateful messages appeared in the mailbox. By now, the neighbors were becoming anxious. A few even approached him, offering help, but he declined politely. He had his own way of handling the situation. Years of training had taught him the value of self-reliance and preparation. He didn't need to make a spectacle. Quiet, careful action was his strength. Even as the attacks intensified, he kept up his routines. Every morning, coffee on the porch. Every day, a walk around the neighborhood. Every evening, tending to the garden and listening to music. On the surface, life continued as usual. But beneath it, a silent war was being waged. He was not reactive in a rash way. He was strategic, patient, calculating. He observed everything, cataloging threats, noting weaknesses, and preparing for the moment when he would need to act. Late one evening, a neighbor approached him cautiously. "Are you okay?" the neighbor asked, eyes flicking nervously toward the damaged gate. "They've been causing trouble for days now. Are you sure you're safe?" He smiled faintly, reassuring but firm. "Thank you, but I can handle this. There's no need to worry." The neighbor nodded but lingered, clearly fearful. He appreciated their concern, but his confidence did not rely on anyone else. He had survived the deadliest situations imaginable, and he knew what he was capable of. The gang's attacks grew even more reckless. One night they set fire to a small pile of trash near the side of his home. Flames licked the walls and smoke curled into the air. Neighbors called the fire department, panicked and uncertain. He did not panic. Instead, he grabbed a hose and calmly extinguished the flames, making sure the fire did not spread. He moved efficiently, deliberately, his mind already anticipating the next move of those who meant him harm. They thought they were showing power, but he had learned to read danger like a book. Every action of theirs revealed a little more about their strategy, their weaknesses, and their limitations. He also began documenting everything carefully. Photographs, notes, sketches, every act of vandalism, every movement he observed, every detail of the gang's behavior. He did not do this for revenge. He did it for clarity, for preparation. If it came to confrontation, he wanted to be ready in every way possible. Knowledge, he knew, was as powerful as any weapon, and patience combined with awareness could turn the tide in ways aggression never could. Despite the escalating tension, he also showed remarkable restraint. He did not confront the gang with violence. He did not lash out in anger. That restraint confused them. They could not understand why someone so obviously targeted remained calm, almost indifferent. Their frustration grew, and with frustration came mistakes, and he knew that mistakes were opportunities, moments where skill and preparation could turn the situation in his favor. Evening walks became more alert. He noticed unusual shadows, sounds of vehicles slowing down, conversations that stopped abruptly when he passed, but he kept his composure. There was no need to act hastily. Observation, patience, and silent preparation were his allies. He understood timing. He understood that the most effective response was often measured and deliberate, not impulsive. The neighborhood itself began to react to the tension, though subtly. Children played less freely, neighbors avoided the streets at night, and whispers of fear spread. But he remained a constant presence, unshaken, calm and measured. That calmness was more intimidating than any aggression. It suggested control, confidence, and an unseen strength. To those who didn't know him, it was unsettling. To those who did, it was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. One afternoon, he noticed that the gang had started working in pairs, scouting the property, testing the boundaries. They assumed the quiet man on the porch was unaware that he was afraid. They were wrong. He cataloged their positions, noted the distance between them, and memorized their routines. His mind worked like a map, calculating possibilities and contingencies. He prepared for scenarios they could not imagine. He studied not only their actions but also their timing, their reactions, and even their likely plans for the next move. Despite all this, he still lived life with normalcy on the surface. He tended his garden, watered the flowers, read quietly in the evening, and kept his home in order. He maintained appearances because control required balance. Life did not stop because others chose to be reckless. He knew that losing composure would be a mistake, and he had learned the value of patience over decades of intense training and experience. By now, the gang had made it clear. They intended to push him to his limits. They had no idea who they were dealing with. To them, he was just a quiet man, easy to intimidate. But he had survived training and missions that most people could never imagine. He had learned to stay calm in the face of danger, to anticipate threats, and to respond with precision. And though he remained calm, the stage was set for a confrontation that they could not escape. Every night, as he sat on the porch watching the streetlights flicker on, he reflected on what was happening. He remembered past challenges, the lessons he had learned, and the strength he had cultivated over years of discipline. He was patient, observant, and prepared. Every act of aggression against him was a step toward revealing the truth, that he was not to be underestimated. And though the gang did not yet know it, the quiet man they were provoking had the knowledge, skill, and experience to turn the situation entirely in his favor. By the time the sun set each day, he remained calm. The neighborhood may have feared what was happening, but he did not. He knew that preparation and awareness were far more powerful than fear or intimidation. The gang was reckless, foolish, and arrogant, but he was methodical, patient, and skilled. He knew that eventually their own mistakes would lead them to their undoing. And he would be ready. Life continued on the surface. He watered the plants, read books, walked the streets, and greeted neighbors with a smile. But beneath it, he was quietly preparing, observing, and calculating. Every attack, every threat, every hateful gesture was recorded, cataloged, and analyzed. The gang believed they were in control. They were not. Patience, strategy, and skill were quietly building, ready to show the full depth of his abilities when the time came. The tension in the neighborhood grew, but he remained unshaken. The attacks were escalating, the danger increasing, but he met it all with calm observation. He understood that appearances could deceive, that the quietest people often had the greatest strength. And though the world had yet to see the full extent of his power, he was already preparing for the day when the chaos would reach its peak, and his skill and experience would finally reveal themselves. Days passed, and the quiet neighborhood was tense. The gang's attacks had become routine, predictable even, but they were escalating, and he was observing each move with careful attention. From the front porch, he could see their actions clearly, their patterns, their mistakes. Every gesture, every look, every step they took was noted. He did not panic, did not act out of anger. Instead, he remained calm, methodical, and prepared. Years of training had taught him the value of patience. Chaos did not scare him. What scared most people was an ordinary thing. For him, danger was familiar, something he had learned to navigate with precision. While the neighborhood feared for him, he had no fear at all. He understood the psychology of intimidation, the ways people tried to instill fear in others. The gang believed themselves powerful, thinking that constant harassment would provoke a reaction. What they did not understand was that he had been trained to remain calm under extreme pressure. Every action they took only gave him more information. He began thinking not about retaliation yet, but about preparation, what he needed to ensure that when the time came, he would have the advantage in every way possible. He started to revisit old routines from his past, the discipline he had learned in the Navy. Every morning's coffee, every walk, every moment of observation became more focused, more purposeful. He began testing small defensive strategies in his home, moving objects in ways that could deter intruders, noticing escape routes, and imagining scenarios that might occur if the gang escalated further. While he worked quietly, there was an unmistakable intensity in his focus, the kind that could not be explained by mere irritation. His past had trained him to anticipate, plan, and act decisively when the moment was right. At night, the memories came. He remembered missions where every second counted, where hesitation could mean failure. He remembered physical training, mental endurance exercises, and survival situations that would challenge any ordinary person. These memories were not burdens. They were reminders of strength, skill, and resilience. And as he walked through them in his mind, he realized how much his current situation mirrored those challenges, though on a smaller, more personal scale. In both cases, observation, patience, and calculated action were the keys to success. He began subtly enhancing his home's defenses. Nothing dramatic, nothing noticeable to the casual observer. He checked locks, reinforced doors, and ensured windows were secure. He moved strategically in the house, knowing which areas offered the best vantage points. He was quiet, precise, and deliberate. Every action was measured. The gang had no idea that they were dealing with someone who had trained for situations far more dangerous than vandalism or intimidation. They thought he was ordinary, predictable, and unprepared. In reality, he was more than ready. During the day, he continued his routine walks, blending in with the neighborhood as if nothing was happening. Yet, his senses were alert to every detail: the way cars moved, the timing of shadows, the patterns of those who meant him harm. Observation was his most powerful tool. It allowed him to stay several steps ahead without ever drawing attention. He could read intentions, predict movements, and anticipate escalation. That skill, born from years of intense training, was now quietly guiding his every action. He also started recording evidence. Photos, notes, sketches, each incident cataloged meticulously, not out of fear, not out of vengeance, but to understand patterns, to anticipate behavior. This process brought clarity. The gang's recklessness became visible in black and white. Their mistakes were easy to predict, their habits obvious, and he knew that when the time came, those habits would be weaknesses he could exploit. Knowledge, he realized, was as powerful as any weapon. Neighbors began noticing subtle changes in him. He was the same quiet man they had always known, yet there was a newfound intensity in his gaze, a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. People whispered about how calm he remained despite everything. They could see his composure, but they couldn't know the depth of skill and experience behind it. His presence had a quiet authority, not demanding attention but naturally commanding it. Even the children sensed it, instinctively understanding that he was someone who should not be underestimated. The gang, meanwhile, grew frustrated. Their actions no longer seemed effective. Each attempt to provoke him ended in disappointment for them. They could not understand why someone so clearly targeted remained calm, unshaken, and seemingly unconcerned. Their confidence faltered, and with it their judgment. They began making mistakes, lingering too long in one place, leaving traces of their plans and revealing patterns that had previously been invisible. Every error they made became another piece of information he cataloged. He also began practicing mental exercises that reminded him of past missions. Situational awareness drills, visualization of potential outcomes, and the mental discipline of anticipating threats became part of his daily routine. While he appeared to neighbors as a man tending to his home, in reality he was preparing for a confrontation that was inevitable. He understood the value of mental preparedness, knowing that calm thinking in high-pressure situations could decide the outcome. The tension reached a new level when one evening, the gang tried a coordinated attempt to intimidate him directly. They drove slowly past his house, yelling insults, throwing small objects, and attempting to provoke a reaction. He remained seated on his porch, unflinching, coffee in hand, calmly observing every movement. He noted the number of men in the car, their positions, how they communicated, and the timing of their actions. To them, his calmness was infuriating. To him, it was the most natural response. He had been trained to face danger calmly, to absorb chaos without losing control. As the days went by, he began imagining the confrontation that would eventually come. He considered every possibility, how the gang might act, how they could escalate, and how he could respond with precision. Every object in his home became part of a mental map of defense. Escape routes, vantage points, and strategic positions were all cataloged in his mind. He visualized the gang's potential actions and his own counteractions. It was not paranoia. It was preparation, discipline, and foresight, skills he had mastered long ago. Despite all this, he continued living life as normally as possible. He tended his garden, read in the evenings, and greeted neighbors with his usual warmth. Normalcy, he understood, was part of strategy. If he allowed fear or aggression to take over, he would reveal vulnerability. By appearing ordinary, he maintained an advantage. The gang believed they were in control, that their actions were intimidating. In reality, they were playing into a plan they could not see. Sometimes he would walk the neighborhood and observe them from a distance, noting their reactions, their positions, and their interactions. He watched as they grew more reckless, more careless. Their arrogance became their weakness. He noticed patterns in their behavior, timing, movements, habits that would later give him the upper hand. Every day he gathered more information, quietly, efficiently, and strategically. His patience was remarkable. He did not rush. He did not act impulsively. Every action he had ever taken in his past, every challenge he had faced had taught him the value of timing. He knew that acting too soon could compromise an advantage. He also understood restraint, knowing that not every provocation needed a reaction. Control, he realized, was more powerful than aggression. Evenings became moments of reflection. Sitting quietly on the porch, he thought about the journey that had brought him here, from intense military training to a quiet life in this neighborhood. He realized that all of his experiences had prepared him for this moment. He understood danger, he understood strategy, and he understood human behavior. And while the world saw a quiet man tending to his home, he knew the truth. He was prepared to act if necessary with precision, discipline, and skill. The neighborhood remained unaware of the depth of his past. They saw only a man who was calm and collected, seemingly ordinary despite the chaos surrounding him. The gang could not comprehend his composure, thinking it weakness. They were wrong. His training had taught him to observe, to anticipate, and to act decisively when needed. He was a master of patience, waiting for the exact right moment to turn the situation entirely in his favor. He began preparing contingencies in his mind. What if the gang tried a direct attack? What if they brought reinforcements? What if they attempted to trap him? Every possibility was considered, every outcome analyzed. He visualized responses, planned escape routes, and imagined defensive positions. Each day he became more ready, more confident, and more prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead. And through it all, he maintained his humanity. Despite the tension, the aggression, and the threats, he remained grounded, kind, and composed. He did not let anger or hatred take root. He understood the value of balance, of maintaining inner calm even when external circumstances were chaotic. That balance, that humanity, made him not only strong but wise. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky with soft hues, he sat on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the street with calm determination. The gang was growing reckless, unaware of the skill, training, and experience of the man they were provoking. They believed they were intimidating him, but in reality, they were setting themselves up for a moment they could not control. And he was ready. This quiet preparation, the careful observation, the cataloging of patterns, and the mental rehearsal of scenarios, all of it was building toward the inevitable confrontation. When the time came, he would act not out of anger or fear, but out of discipline, knowledge, and precision. And in that moment, the quiet man who seemed ordinary to everyone would reveal the true depth of his abilities. Abilities forged through years of rigorous training, danger, and survival. The tension in the neighborhood had reached a peak. The gang's attacks were no longer just small provocations or vandalism. They had become brazen, organized, and aggressive. One afternoon, he noticed them gathering near his street, laughing loudly, throwing objects, and walking in ways that suggested they were testing limits, trying to see if fear would finally break him. But he remained calm. Nothing about this situation surprised him. He had trained for far greater challenges, situations where one wrong move could mean life or death. The difference now was that the danger was personal, close to home, and he was ready to meet it head-on. He spent the day carefully observing the gang's movements. Every glance, every gesture, every footstep was catalogued in his mind. They were reckless, overconfident, and careless, exactly the way he preferred an opponent to be. He noticed how they divided themselves, how they communicated through subtle gestures, and how they assumed their intimidation would work. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who had mastered patience, observation, and strategy under pressure. They thought the quiet man on the porch was weak. They were wrong. Even as the gang plotted their next move, he quietly prepared. He moved through his home with precision, checking every entry point, ensuring escape routes were clear and reinforcing weak areas. He set small strategic measures to slow them down if they tried anything aggressive. Nothing was visible to a casual observer. To the gang, he remained the calm, ordinary neighbor. But inside, he was ready. Years of training had taught him the value of preparation, the importance of readiness, and the power of strategy. By evening, the gang decided to escalate. They threw rocks at the windows, banged on doors, and shouted insults meant to provoke anger. But he stayed seated on his porch, coffee in hand, calmly observing. Every action they took revealed weaknesses, patterns, and openings. He noted the timing of their movements, the way they communicated, and the sequence of their attacks. He did not respond impulsively. This was the moment to gather intelligence, not to react. Patience, he knew, was more effective than aggression. When the gang attempted to enter his property, he had already anticipated it. He moved quietly through the house, positioning himself strategically. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, and precise. His body reacted instinctively to threats, a muscle memory honed through years of intense training. He understood the psychology of confrontation, the importance of controlling the situation before the opponent realized it. The gang, confident and reckless, walked right into the environment he had prepared. As the first member tried to approach the door, he blocked the path silently, not with brute force, but with control. His presence alone was enough to stop the initial rush. Confusion flashed across their faces. They had expected fear, but there was none. Instead, they faced calm observation and unshakable confidence. Their arrogance faltered. In that moment, they realized this man was not ordinary, that he had skills they could not anticipate, and that their actions had consequences beyond what they imagined. The confrontation escalated quickly. The gang tried to regroup, moving around the property in an attempt to overwhelm him, but every move they made was anticipated. He had prepared for this. Each action he took was precise and measured. They could not predict his positions, his responses, or the way he neutralized their aggression without unnecessary harm. Every strike, every block, every move was designed to control, not to destroy. The goal was clear: stop the threat efficiently, safely, and decisively. Neighbors watched from a distance, unsure of what to do. Some were afraid, others curious, but no one interfered. They could see chaos unfolding, but they could not understand it. The quiet man they had known for years had transformed into something more, something disciplined, focused, and capable. It was not just physical skill they witnessed, it was strategic intelligence, the ability to see several steps ahead, to anticipate actions before they happened. And that intelligence gave him the upper hand. As the gang attempted to retreat and regroup, he maintained control of the situation. He used the environment to his advantage, maneuvering them away from key areas and minimizing their ability to act. Every movement he made was calculated, designed to protect his home, his life, and the neighborhood. He did not need to fight with anger or violence. He relied on skill, strategy, and presence. They were trapped in a pattern they could not escape, and he guided them carefully, ensuring that every action led to a controlled outcome. During the confrontation, small details mattered. He noticed which gang members hesitated, which ones were reckless, and which ones could be influenced through control and intimidation. He exploited their mistakes without causing unnecessary harm. Every decision was deliberate. He was not driven by rage. He was driven by precision, experience, and the need to resolve the threat efficiently. By the end of the evening, the gang was disoriented, exhausted, and bewildered. They had faced someone far more capable than they imagined. The aftermath of the confrontation left the neighborhood in stunned silence. The gang retreated, unsure of what had happened. They had underestimated the quiet man they believed to be ordinary, and that misjudgment had cost them control. No one had been seriously hurt, but the lesson was clear. Aggression and intimidation would not succeed here. The quiet man had proven that skill, patience, and strategic thinking could outmatch brute force and recklessness. Neighbors approached cautiously, their fear mixed with awe. They had watched a man they thought they knew respond in a way they could not comprehend. He returned to his porch, calm as ever, coffee in hand, tending to his home and garden as if nothing had happened. But those who observed understood something had changed. The quiet man they had underestimated had revealed his true capability, not through violence but through controlled action, strategy, and presence. He reflected quietly on the evening. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also been controlled. No one had been seriously harmed, and the gang had been neutralized without chaos spreading further. He understood the importance of restraint, of maintaining composure, and of acting only when necessary. These were lessons he had carried from his past life, lessons that had kept him alive in situations far more dangerous than a neighborhood threat. As night fell, he sat on his porch, the calm after the storm settling around him. The street was quiet, the children safe, the neighbors watching with a newfound respect. He had restored order without shouting, without excessive force, relying instead on observation, strategy, and experience. He understood that true strength was not measured by aggression, but by the ability to control the situation with intelligence and skill. Even in victory, he remained humble. He did not boast or make a show of his actions. The neighborhood saw a man tending to his home, calm and composed, unaware of the full extent of his capabilities. But the lesson had been learned. Those who had meant him harm had underestimated him, and that mistake would not be repeated. Control, patience, and discipline had proven more powerful than recklessness and intimidation. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. The gang no longer dared approach, their arrogance tempered by the realization that their actions had consequences. Neighbors began to speak differently, no longer whispering with fear but acknowledging the quiet strength of the man they had once thought ordinary. Children played outside freely again, and the street felt safer, more peaceful. He continued his routines, morning coffee, walks, gardening, but now there was an added layer of awareness and calm confidence. He reflected on what had happened, understanding the importance of every choice he had made. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also been measured. He had acted with precision, protecting himself and his home but without causing unnecessary harm. Every move had been deliberate, every action calculated. This was not instinct alone. It was training, experience, and wisdom, all combined to ensure a safe and effective outcome. The neighborhood would remember the quiet man differently now. He had revealed his strength not through aggression but through calm, strategic action. The gang had been stopped, the threats neutralized, and order restored. And yet he remained humble, patient, and observant, aware that life could present new challenges at any time. His actions had not only protected his home, but had also reminded the neighborhood of the value of calm, intelligence, and restraint. As the sun set each evening, he would sit on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the street with calm eyes. The confrontation was over, the threat neutralized, but his vigilance never wavered. Life had returned to a quieter rhythm, but he knew that preparedness was a continuous journey. The quiet man on the porch had proven that true strength lay not in fear or aggression, but in discipline, observation, and measured action. And in that quiet strength, the neighborhood found a sense of security they had never known before. After the confrontation, the neighborhood began to settle into an unusual calm. The chaos that had hung over the street like a heavy fog was gone. The gang no longer dared to return, their arrogance tempered by the clear display of skill and control they had faced. Slowly, life returned to its quiet rhythms, yet there was a subtle change in the atmosphere. Neighbors walked their dogs without the same anxiety, children played freely without looking over their shoulders, and the street felt safer than it had in years. All the while he continued his routines with quiet dignity, observing life unfold as if nothing had happened, yet fully aware of the world around him. He spent the mornings as he always had, sipping coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the rooftops. There was a peaceful rhythm to it now, a sense of order restored. But he remained vigilant, knowing that life could be unpredictable and threats could appear anywhere at any time. His past had taught him that safety was never permanent, and that the calmest moments,